Sup guys, my name is Kristen,
My name is Sarah.
and here's the 1,000 reasons on why not to be a racist asshole, because it's the Red Rum and Red Wine podcast. So a fair warning before we get into today's case, it is fairly brutal, and I do not leave much of the details out. I feel like in order for us to understand the gravity of the situation and what a lot of people in America face, it is important for me to leave these details in. So I will try to give a trigger warning right beforehand, but just know today's episode is fairly hard. There were multiple times where I did have to step away, so it is going to be hard to hear about. It's going to be hard to talk about, but it is important for us to talk about. I understand at the end of the day that I am a white person in America. I do not experience anything of what I'm about to talk about, but you have to speak on people's stories in order for their names to be remembered, for their experiences to be heard of, and for justice to be served. So, in honor of Black History Month coming to an end, I decided for today's episode that I was going to be talking about the hate crime that was committed against James Byrd Jr.
Oh.
Now, this actually happened in Texas, and
Okay,
it actually...
I'm like, I think I know this one.
We were born. We were born. We were alive when this happened. It happened in 1998 in Jasper, Texas. So... I remember asking my mom if she remembered when this happened. Excuse me. I was about 4 years old when this happened, so do not remember it, but I am kind of surprised at how little I knew about this case. It did enact some pretty big legislation, but I don't know, for whatever reason, I didn't know a lot about it. So I felt like it was really important for me to talk about it because the message that is given in this is, I feel like anyone in America, anyone in the world, should just hear this story. So our case begins on Saturday, June 6th in 1998, when a good old-fashioned party was going down at the residence of a man named Jimmy Mays. The party that he was throwing was to celebrate his 20th wedding anniversary along with his son's birthday, and quite a few people in Jasper showed up to attend that event. I say most because the town of Jasper is really fucking small. A census during 2000, which was slightly after this case, said that there was a population of about 8,000. And the town of Jasper alone is about 10.5 square miles, which converts to 27.1 squared kilometers. So, very fucking small town. For those who don't live in Texas, it's I would say the closest well-known town to Jasper is Dallas. So, it's in the Dallas area.
I mean, that even helps me, and I'm from
Texas. But... maybe it was because of this event, who really knows, the population has slightly decreased. It's barely over 7,500 now. So It's a very, very, very small town. One of the men that was attending this party and who was a local of Jasper was a man named James Byrd. Now, James Byrd Jr. was the third out of 8 children, and his parents were Stella Mae Sharp, who was a Sunday school teacher, and his dad, James Byrd Sr., who was a deacon for the Greater New Bethel Church.
Sorry, but Stella Mae, how cute.
I know.
Wow.
I love that name. His parents seemed so amazing. It was seems like a very tight-knit, close family. It's... I would have wanted to spend Sunday dinners at that house.
Adopt me.
Yeah. Fun fact, not so fun fact, James Jr. was the last segregated class of his high school before they consolidated and began a desegregated high school. So James was, very much in the fucking racist times of America.
He was in the midst of segregation.
Yeah. Even though the crime that happens is one of the first crimes to happen in the modern day history of Texas. So we definitely haven't seen like a lynching or anything by that sorts in Texas, or at least no one in Texas has died for lynching someone. But we are still very much seeing, here's for the whites, here's for the colored. Like, you stay in your place based on where your skin is. And it's, even though James is a product of, you know, us trying to get over racism, it's definitely still obvious that this was something that he faced even in early childhood.
Wait, I have a question really quick.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying up until this point in like the 90s or whatever, no one had gotten in trouble for lynching someone in the modern day?
So it was like 100 years. I say down when I get to the sentencing, like, how long exactly it had been, but it had been well over 100 years that I don't want to say a lynching, because that's not it. It's the like a white man dying for killing a black man, essentially. So no one has been put in death row for hurting a black man or killing him.
That didn't happen to begin with.
Yeah, they like never really went to jail, but I think I say it later on down. In 1867, I think, was the last time that a white Texan man had been sentenced to death for killing a black man. So has it happened since then? Probably, most definitely. They just didn't receive a death sentence for it.
Okay.
But it's obviously, if he's in a segregated high school, I'm assuming that they really try to make Jasper seem like a not racist town. And Jasper, for the most part, even though it is a fairly small town, the black and white population is almost half and half. So it's not like you see a small handful and they're just being really racist. This was really seen as kind of not like a progressive town, but, you know, you have a fairly large black population, so they were able to coincide and really try not to make it that violent. Up until this event happened in 1998, it really did shock the community. Like, when it first happened, they really truly did not believe that it was someone from Jasper that committed the crime, that it was someone who came from outside of Jasper and just so happened to do this, because a lot of the white community was friends with or talked to black people every day. It wasn't like as racist as it may appear or as it may sound as I go on, but
as it could be, at least.
Yeah, for sure, especially with the black population being as large as it was in that town. After high school, James would meet and marry the mother of his 3 children, Renee, Ross, and Jamie, in 1970, and they would be married for quite some time before divorcing in 1993. Now, since Jasper is such a small town, James was really well known within the community for having a lot of charisma, and he loved to sing. Like, any time that he was at a party, it would be said that he would be belting out the words, he would always be singing, and he had a lovely voice, so everyone really enjoyed listening to him and being around him. He was currently unemployed at the moment. He did previously sell vacuums, but
it's a hard business to be in, man.
Yeah. And it didn't help that James was struggling with a drinking problem that was not uncommon. For Jasper, though Jasper was a dry county, it was said in one of the books that I read that they did suffer a lot from alcoholism. There were a lot of people in there that struggled with alcohol addiction.
Yeah, because you tell people they can't have something,
and they're gonna have it.
They're gonna want it more, and they're gonna get it.
Yeah. But unfortunately, his alcoholism would really leave James with kind of feeling lonely and depressed. It also led him to leave a small life of petty crime. He committed various crimes during 1969 to 1996 that would range from theft, forgery, to violation of parole. But in 1996, he went into Alcoholics Anonymous, and even though he didn't stay sober, he really, at that point, tried to say, hey, I want to better myself. I want to make the steps. Let me try and make them.
It's the stages of change, baby.
Always got to admit you have a problem first before you can do anything about it. James's friend, George Billy Mahaffey, would comment saying that James was fairly quiet the night of June 6th. He wasn't his usual self. He wasn't really singing. He was drinking quite a lot, but the party was rather large. A lot of people were there. You just know how it is. He kind of he observed it, but he had other stuff going on. He was talking to other people, so he didn't really think that much of it. You know, he just saw James there, noted how he was, and moved on. George, later that night, would find a ride home with a sober friend named Samuel Williams. And while they were leaving, the two would pass James on Martin Luther King Boulevard as they were leaving the party sometime around 1:30 to 1:45 in the morning on June 7th of 1998. And as they saw James walking, you know, they didn't really think to worry or think to ask him for a ride because this was something that James did all the time. He did not currently have a car. I believe his car was in the shop like the month before. So a lot of people around Jasper were very used to seeing James walking back and forth, kind of going around the town, and this was a very common situation. So they just thought, oh, he'll be fine. He makes this walk all the time. He doesn't need a ride. He'll be good.
Still, I'm like, 2 a.m., he's drunk. Give your friend a ride, please.
I know.
Ugh, like, at least offer.
You should always offer. So many people, I'm glad that so many people were getting mad watching Euphoria, like watching Elliot and Jules leave Rue on the side of the road, because it's like, you don't do that shit. Doesn't matter.
Especially when your friend is like a drug addict.
Yeah.
Who is acting funny and
was literally given alcohol on Xanax, which is so fucking dangerous.
Yeah. But you know what I don't get? Okay, super side note, I'm sorry, it won't take long. When she was in the back seat drinking that, like, what it was like a White Claw, she, you know, Jules turned around and she's like, what
handed it to her.
She handed it. No, she's just like, Rue, are you drinking? You shouldn't be drinking. As if, like I know Jules thinks Rue is sober, but I thought it just meant from drugs, I guess. And so I was like, Elliot knows that Rue shouldn't be drinking because she's on opioids and pills.
I don't think that Rue's choice was alcohol, but I think especially how my uncle sees it, or how my uncle said it, or how other people say it, which kind of makes sense. Sometimes when you drink alcohol, that it lowers your inhibition to say, oh, well, fuck it, I'm just going to take the meth, because...
Oh, yeah.
You know,
well, I mean, yeah, it does fuck with your sobriety, because it fucks with your ability to
whenever
make
you
good
drink
decisions.
Yeah, literally when you're drinking alcohol, the frontal, I was watching some video on it, it was actually pretty cool, but the frontal lobe of your brain decreases in activity, and that's the part of your brain that makes rational decisions and all that shit. So that's why when you drink, you're like, oh, I can do whatever, like social elixir or whatever, I'm confident now. It's because your inhibitions are being muted. So a lot of people, when they get drunk, they're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna take that blow.
Fuck it, I'll drink your Molly water that ends up being horse tranquilizers.
So while Mace's party was ending on one side of town, on the other side of town, there was a different kind of party going on. And by different, I mean probably trashy.
Oh.
So earlier that day, 21-year-old Keisha Atkins would run into one of her former boyfriends, 23-year-old John William King, at the local Jasper Walmart on June 6th of 1998. Now, John King wasn't actually born John King. He was born November 3rd, 1974, as John, whatever his biological dad's last name was. But a few months after he was born, the parents would split up. It was described as like a pretty toxic, violent relationship. So the dad did not talk to John afterwards, and as soon as that relationship ended, John's mom would actually leave him in the care of one of her closest friends. And basically by the time John was 3 months old, the friends that the mom had left him with were like, hey, we've kept him 3 months. You mind if we just, like, keep him for good? And the mom was like, yeah, that's fine. And so the friends basically, like, adopted John from there, and they became, like, their son.
Okay.
Now, despite all of that, like, he lived a fairly good childhood. It was described that he was friends with kids of all kinds of races. The parents would dote on him. Like, the dad would say, like, John was not afraid of physical affection. Like, he was not embarrassed when his parents would go up to hug him or to kiss him. Like, his dad would say all the time, I love you. No mommy daddy issues from his adoptive parents in the slightest.
Okay, so is John a person of color?
No, John is white. James Byrd, sorry for those who don't know, James Byrd Jr. is the one. He's black. Everybody that I'm going to talk to at this party that I'm at now is white.
Okay.
John's life, I guess, would start to take a turn for the worse when at the age of 16, his adoptive mom actually dies. I don't know from what, but it seemed like a rather sudden death. And this really changed John. It seemed like his demeanor was not the same. He kind of started fighting with his adoptive dad. And shortly after this, he did begin a life of, like, petty crime. And so he would be in and out of jail at this point. These were not obvious red flags for Keisha, because when John would invite her over to her apartment later that night, she was like, yeah, I like the attention that you're giving me and I want more of it. So she agreed. And at 10:30 p.m., she would show up to John's apartment to, quote unquote, catch up, as exes do, aka they were going to bang it out. So when Keisha first arrives, she meets John's buddy / roommate, Lawrence Russell Brewer, and learns that he is 31 years old. He's from Sulphur Springs, and he was born in 1967 to a home of about 5 children. I don't think Lawrence told her that, but I'm just telling you. This is me, Kristen. This is me, Kristen, telling you about him.
Okay, thanks.
I learned, and also I read. I'm just gonna shout it out now because I'm gonna forget. I read the book Hate Crime, The Story of a Dragging in Jasper, Texas by Joyce King. That is where I got a lot of the information for today. I will post a picture of it along with the photos for today's episode, but highly, highly, highly recommend. Thank you, Joyce King, for doing all of the work for me. She is a badass investigative reporter who is actually involved in the trials, which I'll get into later. She was like there when it happened. Cannot thank you enough, Joyce. You fucking rock, and thank you for sharing his story in a very
Joyce.
Yeah, excellent way. She 10 out of 10 if you don't like how I'm saying this story, or if you just want to read it and you do like how I'm saying this story, 10 out of 10 recommend the book. There was a lot that I left out that she wrote about, which I couldn't squeeze in, otherwise it'd be way too long. But Joyce would talk about how Lawrence was raised in a rather, like, strict family home. It didn't go into detail over if his dad was abusive, but it did say that the dad did like to drink. And it was volatile enough that at the age of 14, Lawrence would actually be kicked out of his house and never return again, which, yeah. And
it's awesome for a boy of that age. It's great.
Obviously, because what does he do? He turns into a criminal right after this and begins a life of petty ass crime, because I really don't know what other resources that a 14-year-old at that age like would have. It's just Both Lawrence and John actually met while they were in jail. That's how they became buddies
and roommates.
So they were
the first time. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, they both met while at the Beto 1 unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and this prison is not a nice prison. It was described as really anything but. It's like I don't know how a prison is supposed to be ran, but I would assume that it would be one where your inmates aren't attacked just hours of arriving, which is what's actually said to have happened to John. John actually said that it was too, I guess, traumatic of an experience for him to ever want to speak on again, but it was insinuated that as soon as John got to this unit, within the first few hours, he was beaten and sexually assaulted by other inmates at this prison. And this is apparently a very common occurrence at this specific location. Joyce has a chapter on the prison system, which I thought was amazing, and I didn't put in here just because I wanted to focus more on James, but it is astounding, kind of the statistics and the information that is put into our prison system. I'm definitely gonna have to do an episode on it later because I was just kind of like shocked. But this experience of John going to this hardcore prison and basically being assaulted was really what was said to be the final push that changed John from this seemingly normal kid into like this hardened racist criminal.
That'll do it, I guess.
Yeah, and when they both got released in 1997, Lawrence would just simply follow John back to Jasper, and that's when he would move in with him and basically like sleep on his couch. And they met while they were in prison because if you didn't want to get attacked, or if you didn't, I guess, want to get attacked again in John's case, you had to join a group in order to get protection. So they met. Yeah. So they met. Yes, thank you. Because to get into that, they joined a gang. It was a white supremacist gang, unfortunately.
Okay.
So John and Lawrence would join the Confederate Knights of America, otherwise known as the CKA. And they would even get bestie racist tattoos together.
Ew,
which
goosebumps everywhere.
Keisha would fucking see. I do not know the race of Keisha. I don't know. I'm hoping white. I'm hoping white because she said that she saw a silly depiction of a cartoon character, Woody the Woodpecker, wearing a Klan robe, as well as a tattoo of a black man hanging.
Okay, and for those of you who can't see my face, my jaw's to the floor. And
Keisha said later in court, like, these tattoos didn't bother me. Okay. I had no problem with them. I would hope that it's because she's ignorant and not because he, like, didn't... I don't know, because it... Multiple
few excuses.
multiple times. I want to say it's John that had the tattoo of the black man hanging, and he would make multiple comments to multiple people, because multiple people would go on the stand and say he made these comments, that he would always point out, like, oh, do you see this N-word hanging? And he's, like, always bragging about how it's one of his favorite tattoos and all of it's... I truly do not understand how these people were able to sit next to this man and hear him say that and not fucking punch him in his goddamn mouth and break all of his teeth, or maybe like cut out his tongue so he can't say it again. But it was allowed, and it was something that they heard and they were like, oh, it's just John, he won't ever act on it, he's not racist, he just says racist things.
Enablers.
Yeah. So Keisha sees these tattoos, and what does she do? She fucking sleeps with him. She has sex with him. So, actually, like, piping hot tea while they were banging it out, Lawrence had to guard the front door because John had a girlfriend, a heavily pregnant girlfriend, who would show up to the front door while John and Keisha were having sex in John's room and was like banging on the let me in, where's my man? And Lawrence basically had to pretend like no one was home, nothing was going on, nothing to see here, folks. Yeah. And don't feel bad for Keisha. Equally gross. You want to know why? Because she has a common law husband at home that she literally got done banging John, went back home to him. And she she like had to time it so she would get there before he got off of work because he worked late nights.
Well, and okay, so yeah. Fuck the cheaters, but also fuck the cheaters' friends who help them cheat.
I can't say anything because I used to be one, but agree now because I'm a better person now. I've worked on myself.
People change. People evolve. It's great.
Work on yourself, not on other people who happen to be fucking racist. Oh my God. I ugh, I was like, damn, I fucking wish she would have come in and just tore shit up. Because if she did, half of this shit wouldn't have happened. But anywho, sometime after midnight, John's third roommate and longtime buddy, 23-year-old Sean Barry, would arrive after leaving his job at Twin Cinema. And Sean arrived to the apartment ready to fucking party. I really don't know why, though, because he told his girlfriend, who has their, like, 5-month-old child, I think, at this point, at home, and he was like, yeah, as soon as I get done working at Twin Cinema, at Twin Cinema, I'm gonna go home and I'll watch the baby. And what does he do? He goes over, it says that he lived with John and Lawrence, so he went over to his house and he decided to party instead, which...
It's lovely.
You can tell these are all grade A characters.
It sounds like they're all like such gentlemen.
Such just great people. So Sean Barry was born 2 days before Valentine's Day in 1975. He was actually raised by his grandparents, and this was because at the age of 3, his mother, who was described as a rather free spirit, she decided to free herself from her child and abandon him.
That's a terrible situation to be in.
It really, yeah.
The
and
way
like
you worded it was great.
She was fucking a whole ass wife and mother, and so the husband was not Sean's father. It was some other poor guy, some poor sap that she wrapped into marrying her. So she leaves him, leaves the child. But the guy, I think I say his name later on, Donald. His name's Donald Hobson. Even though the mom fucking ditched him and that's not his kid, he's like, I am going to try and be a father figure in your life. So he does stay. And even though, Sean lives with the grandparents, he does very much so try to make an attempt to stay in his life and let him know, like, hey, I'm here for you.
That's
so
nice.
very much a father figure to Sean. He would seem to have a fairly normal childhood until, trigger warning, in 1990, Donald Hobson would commit suicide on Sean Barry's family farm, or like family land. And this was pretty detrimental to Sean. He felt, abandoned by his mother, felt super abandoned by his father, and now the only guy that he has known as a father figure has committed suicide on land that he lives on. So I can only imagine the trauma even within that. So at the age of 16, he basically is like, life doesn't care about me. I'm not going to care about life. Yeah. He drops out of school, and again, you see, starts a life of petty crime and just nonsense. It's sad how there's a very common theme with all of these people. It's just...
And I'm sorry, did you say the stepdad committed suicide on Sean's land?
On Sean's land.
Okay,
it's like the grandparents' land.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I for some reason I heard it weird.
And like, I don't, it didn't say who found Donald's body, but
yeah,
it'd still be traumatizing enough, because I'm sure you have to pass that piece of land, I'm assuming, like at least once a day if you go out of the house. So once Sean shows up, so sorry, I don't know how long Keisha and John last in their room, but they last some time, and basically at some time around 1:45 a.m. she decides to leave, and the boys decide that they're going to go out and start their night. Keisha would watch as the three piled into Sean's 1982 Ford pickup truck, and then watched as she would basically follow them out of the apartment, and then watched as they turned off onto like a major highway. And she said that she saw Sean was clearly driving, Lawrence was in the middle, and then John was sitting in the passenger side. Now, the plan for the three had been quite simple. They were going to drive around. They were going to drink some beer. There was originally a plan to go to this party that some other girl had invited them to. I literally don't know how they get all these females to talk to them and invite them to places, but it ended up like not working out. So they decided, fuck that, we're just gonna drive around and we're gonna look for some young girls to pick up off the street at 1:45 in the morning. Yeah. Yeah.
Like in a small ass town, okay.
Yeah. Gross. Very gross. If you're grossed out, good. They would make their way over to the other side of town in Jasper, which was predominantly known for being the half of Jasper that housed the Black community. This action of driving over to that side of Jasper would cause a chain of events that would not only shock the community within Jasper, but the fucking entire nation of the United States of A. So like I had said earlier, George had drove past with his sober friend who was driving in the car and saw James walking kind of drunkenly on Martin Luther King Boulevard. Now, James would also be seen by an 18-year-old by the name of Stephen Scott, and he would see James and recognize him. I don't think that Stephen was at the party. I actually think that he was at a club that night and was trying to make it home before his mom got home from work, so he didn't have to, typical teenage shit. You don't have to talk to your parents. They have to hear how fucked up you are. So yeah, he's just trying to make it home, and he sees James. And Stephen, he later testifies a lot, saying, this is what I saw that night. But when he sees James walking, he gets the thought that, oh, maybe I should pull over and offer him a ride. But he starts to kind of look at James, and he sees that James, he's clearly stumbling. He's had quite a few drinks that night. And Stephen, though he feels kind of bad about it, he's like, I'm really trying to make it home before my mom gets home. And I feel like if I were to pull over and help James out, like, he's kind of drunk to that point where, like, it's going to take me like an hour to get this guy home. I got to try and lure him in the car. I got to walk him to the door. I got to make sure he goes in. So he's like, James makes this walk all the time. I've seen him do it a million times. He'll be fine. And so he drives off. And he goes home without offering James Byrd Jr. a ride. Stephen would later say that this was like one of the biggest regrets that he has. And later on, Stephen would actually report seeing Sean's pickup truck with 4 people being inside the truck later on.
4?
With one of those men, he stated, clearly being James Byrd Jr.
Ugh.
So how this happened was that when Sean, Lawrence, and John are driving around town, very fucking obviously so, they realize no young woman in her right goddamn mind is going to be walking out around 1:45 in the morning by herself. It was kind of like a stupid plan to start off with, but these are stupid people that we're talking about. So when they realize that they cannot pick up women, they're not going to get any more of the V tonight, they want to have some fun. So they grab a chain that Sean has in the back of his truck and they like go around the town, pull it over mailboxes, and then like yank the mailboxes out, which is fucking illegal. Don't do that. I'm pretty sure that's like a federal fucking felony
destruction
offense.
Of property.
Well, it's like government.
And mailboxes are like, it's like federal.
Yeah, so
property.
Like don't be doing that shit. But they.
Well, also, I'm like, these guys are like early 20s. I'm so sorry. That's what high schoolers do.
Yeah.
When they're booze cruising.
Yeah. Well, they literally, none of them made it to high school, or if like they either didn't make it to high school or like didn't graduate high school. So like that's the mentality. That's the mentality that we're thinking of. Like these guys are
super fair point.
They could have used some fucking education.
Yeah. I don't need no education.
Except you really do. God damn. So yeah, their brilliant plan of picking up women isn't working. They destroy some mailboxes, fucking way illegally. And once the excitement of them destroying other people's mailboxes wears off, they notice James Byrd Jr. walking rather drunkenly down the street. This is when a new plan is hatched in the trio's mind, and Sean would pull over the car. I don't know if he did this on his own or if John or Lawrence asked him to, but Sean would pull over the car, roll down his window, and ask James if he needed a ride. James and Sean actually knew each other, though I really don't know how well. Again, it's a small town. It would say that, Sean would see James walking along the road quite often. But I did find in the book, and as well as a few articles, that James and Sean had actually shared the same parole officer because, like I had said, all four of them had been committing fairly small crimes, though nothing violent at this point. So they both had the same parole officer, both saw each other around town, and it's a really fucking small town. So James, seeing a familiar face, being rather fucking drunk and probably not wanting to walk, was like, hell yeah, dude. Thank you so much. I would love a ride. So he hops in the back of the truck and he's like, yeah, man, take me home, whatever's closest. It would often be said that he would either walk to one of an apartment that he lived at or his parents' house. I don't know which is closer, and I don't know where he exactly told them to go, but he was like, yeah, take me home. Actually, now that I read it, James didn't say, take me home. When Sean asked him for a ride, he's like, nah, instead I'll hang out with you white boys for a bit. And then he, hopped in the back of the truck and started to drive off.
Fuck. That makes it so much worse, because
he's
down
fucking
to
funny.
Chill.
He's so funny. I just, they would offer him a beer and he'd be like, hell yeah, man. So he cracks open a beer and he starts drinking it. And yeah, it's fucking devastating because that is the only act of kindness that James would see from these people. And James wouldn't even be able to finish his beer before what I'm about to fucking say happens.
That's a disrespect.
So, what I'm about to describe of the events that happened to James Byrd Jr. on the night of June 7th of 1998 are hard for any human to hear. So this is the point where I would advise, if you do not want to hear the pure evil that can happen in humanity, to skip over some minutes. It's just about to be really rough. So John would apparently become enraged over the fact that Sean would offer to give James a ride. And when James stepped into the car, John would start to get agitated and would loudly state, that's some hoe-ass shit that you just did, picking up a fucking N-word. Sean would simply laugh off this statement and try not to think too much into it before turning down Martin Luther King Boulevard onto FM 776 before he turned from Farm Market Road and then to the State Highway 63 and heading east. Sean would stop his truck at a local BJ's grocery, and this was basically under the guise that, again, they were being nice to James. John and Lawrence would step out of the middle and passenger side of the truck and basically say, hey, James, why don't you hop in the passenger side? Us white boys will sit in the back and we'll let you sit in the front. It's the least that we can do since we're giving you a ride home. And James, thinking that they are just being nice to him, were like, hell yeah, dude, thank y'all. So he gets up to the passenger seat, starts finishing off his beer, and gets on with his night. Sean would then offer the quiet James a smoke, which he would accept, before offering to take him off-roading. Sean would then take a wild turn off of the main road that James was probably not expecting, because at this point he becomes somewhat alert to his surroundings and starts to get a little anxious over what's going on. He would ask the three where they were headed, but they would remain silent as the four drove deeper into the dark forest until they hit a small clearing. John from the back would then bang on the roof of the truck and yell at Sean to stop in the clearing, and once he did, John and Lawrence would arrive to the passenger side door and pull out a confused and probably scared James from the vehicle. Sean, John, and Lawrence, I will say, all are tiny. I believe the tallest was like 5'6" and 145 pounds. So, and the other two were smaller than that.
Jesus.
Now, James like small man syndrome. James, on the other hand, was a rather large dude. He was 5'9" and 160 pounds and twice their age. But one thing was, at the age of 49, he suffered from chronic arthritis, and this actually disabled him because of this. That and the fact that, you know, he was clearly inebriated, you would think would make him an easier target for a crime of violence. But according to the evidence and the testimony that was given later on of the nights of the event, James Byrd Jr. fought with every ounce of strength that he had in him. James would cling to the frame of the Ford pickup truck while kicking and screaming desperately for help. It was said that while he was being beaten, he would ask constantly why this was happening to him. Sean, according to later testimony, would jump out of the car in an attempt to stop the attack that was happening in front of him. But instead, Sean just really stood there and did nothing, as he would watch as John became angered by the fact that James was fighting so hard, and would eventually step back and say, fuck it, let's just kill this N-word. John King Lawrence Brewer would then pry James's hands from the frame of the truck, which in court records, and I guess just like from a fucking human standpoint, it was said that the strength that they had to pry him off showed that it was not, because like a lot of what you see later is they do a lot of blaming, like, oh, this person didn't know, this person didn't know, this person was full at fault. The strength that it took to pry James off of that car, it was later described that like they almost needed all three of them to do it. So
yeah, and I'm like, so Sean is over here like, oh, I tried to help him, I tried to save him, but then also you were driving, you stopped the truck in the clearing, like, your friend was banging on the roof to make you stop, like, you didn't have to stop, you didn't have to do any of that.
He didn't. And Joyce is a way better human being than I am, because she doesn't make you try to sympathize with Sean, but she really tries to be non-biased and say, look at Sean's past and look at potentially the fear that Sean felt of, obviously, like, he's watching two people kill someone and he thinks, oh, well, maybe I could be next if whatever. She really tries to, like, play that card. Me, on the other hand, like, especially with the shit I say later on, like, fuck you, Sean, you deserve everything that you fucking got, because like, fucking, I would rather you kill me than to watch what I'm about to say. Like, no, there's no way that I don't think I could sit there and watch that happen. It and then how do you watch it? And then especially what I say later on, like, he definitely had more of a role than just watching. So
okay, let's fucking go then. Yeah, I have my wine poured. Yeah,
like, fuck you, Sean. You kind of do deserve everything that you have coming to you. The only
good part about this is that I'm drinking out of my pit bull cup. So
we need some joy right now, because it's about to be all gone.
I just feel it already, like I'm hot and cold at the same time. Okay.
Once they were able to pull James off of the frame of the truck, it was rather easy for them to get him to the ground and basically continue their vicious attack. It would be said that James would pray to God and he would beg for mercy while he was being beat with such a force that John's lighter, with the word possum inscribed on it, which was his prison name, as well as
roadkill,
as well as the engravings of KKK on it, would fly out of his clothing. So he was beating James with such a force that a lighter that was probably like in his pocket violently, like, investigators said that it looked like it was thrown almost out of a car crash. Like, it was tossed. It wasn't, I don't know how you can tell that. Yeah. I don't know how you can tell that just by looking, but like the way that the things were spread out, it wasn't just like someone went and dropped everything. Like, everything was launched as if there was a violent attack going on. Like, the evidence in the crime scene, when police would go later on, like, they said it was very hard for all of them to watch because you could clearly see the picture of the violence that went down.
Ugh.
James's, this, like, really fucked me up. I'm sorry. I'm if, like, don't give me shit if I cry. I cried fucking typing this out. If I cry, I'm so sorry. I'm really trying hard not to, because I don't want
shit if I don't cry.
Yeah, I'm trying not to, because I don't want people to be like, oh, she's just crying because of it, but it's fucking hard.
No, Kristen doesn't fake cry, and I don't fake cry, because I've never cried during an episode, actually. I don't think. I've almost cried a few times.
I kind of cried during a few, so don't judge me.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're not, this is true emotion over here.
So one of the items that was actually found spread out on the field was a hat that had belonged to James. And it was actually described by his family as being a brand new souvenir baseball cap that he had gotten from San Francisco, I believe from, like, one of his relatives.
It was a Giants hat?
A San Francisco hat, like the SF. I don't know if it was Giants.
Oh, baseball cap.
Yeah.
Well, just because, sorry. Because the San Francisco Giants. I thought you meant like
it may have been, but it just said like a souvenir San Francisco baseball cap. But it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that could be anything. Yeah.
And like James's watch was put out, and it just, I don't know why, like, that fact really got me, because obviously when they're trying to identify the body, when they talk to the family, like, these are the items that are, the photos of them are shown, and they have to go like, because James, like. James, I didn't write this down, but James had actually been at a bridal shower with his family. I believe it was a bridal shower, some kind of shower, earlier that day. Oh. So a lot of, like, what he was wearing, and, like, the sister had given him the watch that he always wore. And she, like, had made a joke about it was her husband, like, had two of a nice watch, and so he wouldn't mind if one was missing, so she gave it to James, and she would have to later confirm, like, yeah, that was the watch that I gave James. And so it's like all of these items of his life are just being strewn about as he's violently being beaten, as well as his attackers' items are violently being strewn about because they are beating him with such a ferocity that, like, I don't want to say it's good, but the fact that this happened is what led investigators to later on find them, which I'll, like, describe later on. But
that makes sense, because it sucks that it was such a brutal fight. Like, James literally gave his all, and I am so proud of him for that. He
fought. He didn't deserve to die, like,
because if it was a more so-called, like, clean fight where he got knocked down faster, not as much stuff thrown about, that really can create less evidence, less idea of what had happened on the scene. And so it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, it's hard. A lot of good legislation obviously comes out of this case, but I hate to be one of those people, like, you want to see the good out of it, but there's no good that comes out of this case. This is a fucking terrible story, and we talk about this so we can talk about the racism and the violence that has happened in America that so many people want to deny and say it doesn't exist. And it's just, we have to talk about these stories. We have to say these people's names, because I just refuse to let this be forgotten.
Yeah, and it's like we've mentioned on other cases before, mostly I think about domestic violence or stalking cases, but it sucks that sometimes policies and legislations don't happen or change until an actual violent crime has happened, which sucks. And that is very much so in this case, I guess, and in many other scenarios. And I just it shouldn't be in that order. I don't know.
It shouldn't.
Preventative.
It's really, like, maybe we should change our justice system a little bit, but it's hard. So along with the brand new souvenir cap that James had gotten that was strewn about the field, officers would later also find cigarette butts and a, like, pack of old cigarettes. as well as a wrench with the name Barry that was scratched on top of it, which I really don't know at what ferocity that you would have to beat someone up to have like some fucking wrench pop out of the truck or your belongings, but thank God that it did, because this is the one piece of solid evidence that definitely comes back to haunt them later on.
Yeah,
so
puts a name, attaches a name to the crime scene.
Not even a fucking nickname like Possum. Like, that is literally the last name of one of the fucking people that is there. So thank you, Sean, for being such a fucking idiot.
I mean, you might say this later on whether or not the wrench had blood evidence on it, but I'm like, what if it was strewn about because they used it to like as a weapon and they just were idiots and forgot about it?
I know that for sure it was described that a baseball bat was used, though I don't know what, like, I was not able to get a super, like, what I say is pretty detailed. As far as like the beating of James, I did not get a very detailed account, nor like, I feel like what I say is enough. I don't want to go into detail about it, but it was a bad beating. It was to the point where a lot of people assumed that like James was unconscious by the later events that happened, but we see later on that like he wasn't. So it's just really fucked up. So Sean is watching this ferocious beating, and he's still standing there. He's still not doing anything, apparently. But witnessing this beating would be enough to cause Sean Barry to piss his pants.
Oh, shit.
So there would actually be evidence of, like, his urine later being mixed in with some of James's blood. I did hear in some articles that they would actually defecate and piss on James. I really hope that that isn't true. I hope that it was just the evidence of Sean being a pussy and pissing his pants is where they got the evidence of that. But
well, because that popped in my mind. I wasn't gonna like interrupt you just to ask, but since you brought it up, like, part of me thought, like, well, were they assholes and fucking, like, pissed on James's body?
In some of the articles, it did say that they did.
Yeah.
Which,
and then part of me was going to ask, like, did Sean admit to pissing his pants? Or, like, was it just assumed because they found his
Well, when Sean
DNA?
gets a spoiler alert, they get arrested. When Sean gets arrested, Sean never changes. He's still wearing the pants. And, like, the pants have clear, like, piss odor still on them. So I don't know if Sean willingly admitted I was so scared I pissed my pants, but I know that the clothes that he were arrested in were like the clothes that he was wearing that night.
Great.
So
yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
doesn't completely answer the question, but it does make me sway one way a little bit.
And like when you hear what they do next, I really wouldn't put it beside them to do that, because what happens next is Lawrence goes to the truck, and I guess Sean has a can of black spray paint that just so happens to be laying in the truck. So Lawrence would grab this bottle of spray paint, point it straight up to James's face, and then spray it right at him. John, this really pissed me off for some reason, like, the act of Lawrence spray painting James in the face, like, this is what caused John to be like, whoa, man, whoa. This is too much. You don't spray paint someone in the face. Lawrence would simply just respond by saying, I'm doing this because James made my foot hurt from kicking him so hard while I was beating him.
What the actual fuck?
It's a literal excuse. And spoiler alert, they brag later on. Like, there's a game of volleyball that they get invited to play the day after, and Lawrence is like, I can't play, my foot's hurt. Look at how swollen my foot is. Isn't that crazy? But he doesn't, like, say how he got it. He just says, like, oh, I can't play because of my foot. But, like, look at how swollen it is.
I started to drool because... Okay.
And I guess his foot didn't hurt that much. Because with the black spray paint now blinding James, Lawrence would give, or it's hard to say who, but he does have the hurt foot, so I'm assuming it's Lawrence, would give a devastating kick to James's head. And that's when the trio would say that James would apparently go limp and he would kind of stop fighting in such ferocity as he did. This was not enough for the three. They decided that they needed to continue the high that they were feeling. And then that's when they decided to grab the chains that they had been using earlier to pull the mailboxes out of the ground. They would at this point decide to pull Byrd's pants and underwear down, fully exposing him. And from here, wrap the chains around James's ankles. They would then begin to tie him to Sean's pickup truck before getting in the truck and turning it on, while John would simply explain to the others that this was the same thing that was done in the olden days to the N-words who messed with the white women.
What the fuck?
Though I had explained that James had been severely beaten to this point and probably should not have been awake, and Lawrence also claims that at this point James's throat had been slit by John before they began dragging him. Forensic evidence would conclude that James was very much alive and conscious when John King, as described by accounts, would then step on the gas and proceed to drag James Byrd Jr. across the dirt trail. While being dragged and skinned alive by the dirt road beneath him, I would imagine that some form of relief must have been felt when the chains loosened and he stopped being dragged. But it was probably quickly crumbled when John, Lawrence, or Sean, whoever was driving, would slam on the brakes and reverse quickly back over to James. It was said that they may have ran over him at that point because when they did get out of the truck, his body was tangled underneath the bed of the truck.
They may have ran over him.
All three of the men would laugh as one of the boys jumped out to retie the chains before they were off again, dragging James Byrd Jr.'s body along Huff Creek Road. I really don't know why or how, but James was still alive at this point, and it was said that he would try to use his elbows and knees to keep his head off of the ground and from hitting any pavement and further hurting himself.
Oh.
It was while he was doing this, and the three were probably watching from the back of the car, that he would hear the men yell things like, "Look at that N-word," bouncing around all over the place. They would drag his body deep into the black community of Jasper, and James could only helplessly watch as he tried to keep his head from hitting the concrete as he would pass houses that he probably knew the owners of. James Byrd Jr.'s suffering would finally end for him when 1.5 miles to being drug on the hard pavement, feeling every rock that hit him, James's naked body would bounce off into a ditch on the right side of the road and hit a ragged edge of a concrete culvert. For those who don't know what that is, and if you've happened to see Shawshank Redemption, it's like the drainage tube that Tim Robbins escaped out of. It's like a sewer ditch thing that you see. The force at which James would hit this culvert just below his right arm would automatically sever James's right arm, shoulder, head, and neck, killing him instantly. Sean Berry, Lawrence Brewer, and John King would continue to drag James's headless corpse on the streets for about another mile, dragging his body for a total of 3 miles, or about 5 kilometers, before they finally took James's mutilated remains and displayed them along a Black-owned church cemetery. One of the things that like really killed me reading the book, one of the details that just really sank it in, was when the family finds out that their son, their brother, their loved one has died, their father, they start laying out suits and they begin thinking, okay, well, what suit do we want to bury him in? What suit are we going to have him seen in for the last time? Because they expect that they are going to see him again, even if it is for the last time. I say the sheriff's name later, but they would ask the sheriff, one of the sisters would come up to him and she would say, hey, like, how bad were my brother's injuries? I'm just trying to kind of like get an idea of how we want to prepare him for the funeral. And the sheriff would respond to her like, please don't ask me that, because then I would have to tell you what happened to him. And it was at that point that this sister and the family realized like he wasn't going to be wearing a suit and they wouldn't be seeing him again.
God, that's awful.
A motorist just a few hours later would discover the remains of James Byrd Jr. and report it to police. Police during the investigation, seeing like it was easy for them to spot the crime scene because they could see the bloodied drag of the 3 miles. Like of that, they would mark some, like in one article I read over 80, but they would mark at least over 70 spots that were known to have any tissue, bone, or blood fragments with bright spray paint along that road. And I did send you a photo of like one of...
I'm sorry, I forgot the name you called it. The drainage hole thing.
A culvert.
Yeah, I pictured it in my mind when you were talking about it more under like a bridge type thing, but no, it's just a dirt road, like, and it's fucking rigid.
Yeah.
Man.
James's family, along with much of the community of Jasper, would find out about his death after they got out of Sunday service the following day.
Ugh.
The news of this would rightfully shock the entire community and left them with the question of who could possibly have done this.
Everyone's looking at their neighbors.
Meanwhile, Sean, Lawrence, and John had made it back to the apartment and were basically trying to get their story straight. John was convinced that Keisha Atkins would play along and be their alibi for that night and say, like, hey, I hung out with them. And John would even go as far as calling Keisha at like 5 a.m. and being like, hey, I need to see you again. I guess really desperate to try and get that next alibi.
That just shows though that they like knew they fucked up.
Yeah.
They weren't just like idiots.
And she was like, it was kind of weird that he was calling me, but she didn't really think anything of it. She just must have been like, oh, the sex was really good for him. Like, he must want more. I don't know.
Oh, I was banging.
Oh, my pussy? Bomb. But Sean, on the other hand, I mean, like, even though he witnessed it, even though he let it happen, he very much, I guess, was feeling guilt in the moment and kind of freaking out about it. He would question John and basically be like, why the hell did we just do that? Why did this need to take place? And when he asked John this, John would basically say like, oh, we're starting the Turner Diaries, which is, I have never read it, never heard of it, but apparently it's like this white supremacist manifesto type of deal. And so John was just saying like, oh, we're about to do this manifesto thing, like we're about to start something huge.
Ew, yeah, I've heard of it, but I've never read it.
Sean would even debate to call his uncle, Raymond Hobson, who just so happened to be a fucking state trooper.
Oh.
And could have probably easily just...
I mean, it not an option.
It's, if you're feeling guilty, if you didn't do anything about it and you're feeling guilty, the next best step would obviously be to confess to the crime that just happened and fucking turn yourself in.
Hey, Uncle, I know I haven't talked to you since last Christmas, but I need a favor.
Need a real quick favor. Just committed a capital murder, need some help. But no, instead, Sean goes with Lawrence to Twin Cinema the next day to help clean up the movie theater, and still wearing the clothes from the night before. So yes, including the piss-stained pants that he never changed out of. Sean would decide to go ahead and call his uncle, but instead of being this remorseful person that the book likes to describe, which, okay, I get it, maybe he did, but his actions showed different, because instead of confessing to the crime, Sean would call up his uncle and be like, hey, so what happened on the crime scene? What leads do you have? Are y'all close to catching this person? Do you think you have an idea of who it is? I'm asking for a friend.
He's fishing for information so he knows how to further get away.
Sean's actions, I mean, say all that I need to say that he's a racist, but a lot of people, as you will see later on, like, especially during trial, his defense attorney would, like, release this video of saying, like, oh, Sean had all these black friends growing up. It was really hard for Sean's family to hear about this because Sean's brother, Lewis Berry, actually had a friend, Tommy Falk, and a black name named Gracie that they liked to play in a band with, and I guess Sean would, like, go over. So it was very much, the book would try to describe him as, like, this guy that was kind of put in the wrong place at the wrong time. But at the same time, it's like, if you truly thought that what you were doing was wrong, then you wouldn't have called your uncle asking for advice. You wouldn't have done what you were about to do next, because as soon as he was done getting off of the phone with his uncle, he would go to a car wash and wash all the evidence off of his truck. So it's like, that's why I say Joyce is a better human than I, because she really tries to say, like, you know, Sean was messed up. He really had all this pressure. He really thought that, like, he may die. And I mean, definitely John and Lawrence, like, right on a prison wall, like, Sean is a fucking snitch and a liar, don't trust him, like, mean girl shit. I mean, there's definitely reason to believe why he wouldn't stop it in the moment, but at the same time, like I fucking said, like, you can kill me before I would let that shit slide in front of me. And then to go on and to call your uncle and then ask questions, and then you go to a car wash and you wash evidence off of your truck, that doesn't show to me that you are remorseful in any way. It just shows me that you're not trying to get caught. So, like, great for you. Thank you, Joyce, for being non-biased, but I'm Kristen and I am not non-biased. Fuck you, Sean. You deserved everything that you have coming to you.
Yeah, the actions do not line up.
No, they don't. With a remorseful person, they really don't.
It's pretty factual, in my opinion, on evidence, on basically based on his actions alone, that, like, he's playing like old I was afraid for my life type of fucking thing, when he's
like, you had
probably holding the fucking baseball bat at one point.
Yeah, multiple opportunities for you to step in to do something different or to try and correct the actions that you've already done. You don't do any of that, you make it worse. Ergo, I don't fucking trust you. I don't believe you. This emotion of sadness that you're trying to display, like, I'm not buying it. Maybe go to Juilliard and learn some better acting skills.
I'm sorry you regret being friends with those two guys. I'm sorry you regret going out that night. I'm sorry you regret getting caught. But nothing you say, I believe.
Yeah, like, at the end of the day, you're not shit. It's just,
you ain't shit.
John and Lawrence would kind of, like I said, they kind of spent the day all over the place. John and Lawrence would hang out with some friends. They would brag, like, I believe Lawrence had the bad foot and John had, like, like hurt hand or something like that. And so they would brag to multiple friends about their injuries. They would brag some more about their racist tattoos. They were acting fairly normal, but some friends would say later on that they were acting a little sketchy. And Tommy Falk, who was Sean's brother's friend, they would John and Lawrence would actually end up going over to Tommy's house later on, and Tommy would be like, yeah, they were acting really sketchy. I don't know. They went into my backyard for a little bit and just kind of like disappeared after that. And when they went into the backyard, John and Lawrence were actually burying the chain that they had used to drag James with in Tommy's yard. And when police later would go and ask Tommy, hey, do you mind if we search your house? And he's like, yeah, no problem. And then they find the chains in the backyard and they're like, hey, what's this? Tommy was like, did not know that they were doing that, but I do know the night that they asked me to go into the backyard and then suddenly left, they were acting sketchy as fuck. So while the boys were spending their day as if nothing fucking happened, Jasper police are fucking on it. At this point, they look at the crime scene, they look at what happened, and they realize there is no way that us as a tiny police sanction can do this properly. We need help. Thankfully, they were not arrogant about it in the slightest. So they would reach out to the FBI and say, hey, we believe that this is a crime. Later on, I state like that as soon as one of the detectives saw the lighter, he was like, I automatically knew that this was a hate crime. It's just something that we needed help on. They also, like I had mentioned earlier, were really under the impression that this was a crime that was not committed by someone who lived in the town of Jasper. Right. They had a really hard time believing that someone that they probably knew, and it's a small town, so they probably knew them, could be capable of this. And they very much believed that until they found the wrench belonging to Barry.
So were there witnesses that came out that had seen or heard the commotion of James being dragged through the streets?
So a lot of witnesses do come out to say later on that they saw James inside of the truck. But when it comes to the actual events of them dragging him through the streets of Jasper, no one comes out and says anything. I do know that unfortunately it is only 3 miles, and I do know that it said that he is dragged through some residential part of Jasper, but it is also said that kind of when he got that final kick to the head, as well as when he was spray painted in his face, it like he was screaming for help when he was getting beaten, but pretty much after the kick and after the spray paint, James was in a position where he could no longer scream. So
right.
I really hate to imagine this, but it probably, like, the sound of a body being drugged may have sounded like something normal. If someone wasn't outside, they may have not.
Well, and if it was being, the truck they were driving, I imagine it being,
it's like an old-timey
it's the 90s.
Truck.
It's a farm truck. It's not quiet necessarily, and it's, if someone's not yelling for their fucking lives, you won't probably hear.
Yeah, I know in the clearing it was said that, he was screaming, but definitely at the point that he hit where he was being dragged, there was no sound that was emitting from him. It was, and that's why that's why they would try to say later on, I guess, to try and take the pressure off of them for being so evil, that, James was unconscious when we were dragging him. He wasn't feeling anything. But then forensic evidence shows that, like, just because you weren't hearing him doesn't mean that he wasn't conscious, because he was very obviously trying to pick up his head, and he was really trying not to fucking die. Like, he probably thought that once he was dragged, they would stop, and it's hard for me. it's a hard case to walk away from because, or to even read about. I had to walk away many times because I just can't imagine the thought process, what James was feeling, and anytime I put myself, it's just...
Yes, and I'm sorry. I do have to laugh at the fact that they would make that comment of, or try and make some sort of claim about how, oh, he was unconscious and didn't feel anything or whatever.
Like, that makes it any fucking
okay,
better that you're dragging a literal human being down.
So that makes it any better. Like, please explain it to me and make it make sense. I'm trying to add it up. I'm trying to do the math. It does them no justice on their argument. And I don't know why they would even fucking try.
No. And you'll, like... later on during trial, it's so fucking stupid because the defense attorneys at some point, because the photos are shown to the jury later on of like the crime scene and everything, and the defense attorney at one point argues like, don't show them the photos, that'll make them think that he's really guilty, it'll just prove the case even more. And I'm like, bitch, that's exactly why you show the photos. And like, I'm sorry, it was hard to do it for this case, but that's why I tried to go into as much detail about his assault as possible, because if I were to say that he, like, obviously it's horrendous when you hear that he was dragged, but when you hear the full scope of what happened to James, I really don't understand how anyone can be racist after hearing this story. So thankfully, when the cops see the wrench that has the etching of Barry on it, they get their first major hint. Because, again, like I've mentioned, everyone knows everyone, including the police, knowing two brothers that happen to have the last name Barry. Now, they were trying to wonder which of these Barry brothers could commit such a crime.
Barry brothers.
When they assumed, well, it's probably the one that owns that white pickup truck, which of course belonged to Sean Barry. And in a karmic twist of fate, it just so happened that on the other side of town, while they're trying to figure this out, DPS trooper named Larry Douglas Pullman pulls over that same exact truck on US Highway 96.
No fucking shit.
Now, thank you, Sean Barry, for being a fucking delinquent, because he was pulled over for having an expired inspection sticker. His license was also expired, and he had no proof of insurance.
Okay, that's not delinquent behavior. That's like stupid white girl behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Sean Barry, for being a stupid-ass white girl. Because these were the three excuses that the cop needed for him to be like, okay, 3 strikes, you're out. We got to take you to jail because your shit is just all out of whack. Because, of course, this cop knew that Sean was very much on a newly wanted list for a hate crime that had just so happened in that town. Not, like, even like, the day before.
Seen as a suspect or, like, as actually wanted, kind of?
No, they were like, his wrench is
him.
at the scene of the crime, someone murdered, like... They had a really hard time believing that it was Sean, but they were like, he right now is the only person that we can tie to the scene of the crime. We have to get him in.
Ugh.
So just before 9 p.m. on Sunday, Sean Barry would be arrested on June 7th of 1998. Literally not even 24 hours later. Sean would not fight this arrest, even though, like, he obviously wasn't being arrested for murder just yet. He would remain rather quiet and basically just give simple yeses to when asked if he understood his rights, as well as giving permission for investigators to search his truck, which thank you for doing, Sean, because when investigators looked into his truck, Sean did a really fucking shitty job of cleaning it, thankfully, and they would find blood spatter on the undercarriage of the car, as well as human flesh that was lodged into the truck's side and chassis, I don't even know what it's called, but like some bit of his truck.
Yeah, probably like those where the detailing is, and like, you know, there's
'Cause
cracks, creases.
Even
Oh my
me as a
God.
murderer, which, like, hate to be giving that advice, but if I were, like, cleaning my car after a crime, I would not think to clean the underside. So, like, so fucking
That, like
smart
the
to look
bottom?
there. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
underneath my engine and shit. Because, I mean, they, at one point, had
Yeah.
ran him over, allegedly. So, yeah, there is a
True.
lot of evidence underneath the car. And when Sean was cleaning it, he was, of course, only cleaning the
Yeah.
outside. Not trying to give any
Ooh,
advice to serial killers, but, like,
that makes so much sense.
yeah, you gotta
And
look under the underneath. Yeah.
brilliant.
Ugh. Like I said, he didn't do that good of a job, though, because there was still dirt and vegetation on the outside of the car that would very similarly match dirt and vegetation that was known to be around Huff Creek Road, which was the road where essentially James was dragged. And if this was not enough, he has other tools in his truck that have the same exact etching of Barry that matched the wrench that was found at the scene of the crime. Police were fucking shocked when they put all this evidence together and realized that Sean Barry, you know, was at this crime. Because, like I had said, Sean was not really seen as a racist in the town. He was seen as kind of like this normal dude. Like, his brother was friends with black people. Sean in his adolescent life had been friends with black people. It was like, during trial for Sean, I really actually want to say that one of his black friends actually went on the stand and was like, I don't think that he would have ever hurt me. So they really try to play this like Sean's not a racist card,
Wow.
which I'm like, okay, but you're guilty of being a fucking asshole if that's not the
Yeah.
case. Because, like,
I
you
mean-
literally just let a man die right in front of you, and you called your uncle fucking asking questions, and then tried to shittily wash all the evidence off of your car. Like, that doesn't sound like someone who is guilty, racked with guilt to me.
No.
But what police did know was that Sean was known to have been friends with some well-known racists in the town, aka John and John's new friend, Lawrence. So I'm assuming because of the arrest, police had originally, for the arrest of Sean for like having his expired car stuff, police were originally going to go and, you know, question the roommates, kind of see what they could get out of Sean. But now they had a really good excuse to go and see if John and Lawrence were potentially involved.
Hell
So
yeah.
so they would go over to the apartment. They would run into John and Lawrence coming back from the local Walmart, and they would ask, hey, would you mind if we take you down to the precinct, just ask you a few questions, you know, nothing big, and while we're asking you these questions, do you mind if we check out your apartment? And they're like, yeah, we can ask questions, and yeah, no problem. Check our apartment. Yeah, I really don't know why they do this so easily.
Like-
Thank God they do, but...
Yeah, like, okay, that was easy.
Yeah, so they take him down to the precinct and they start beginning to search the apartment. They were hoping to find something to, you know, connect them to the murder in the apartment, but unfortunately all they were able to find was really fucking randomly large amounts of meat, which they assumed were stolen and would be proved later on that, you know, it was meat that they had stolen, along with other stolen property and a white supremacist manifesto, the Turner Diaries, which is the manifesto that John was talking about when Sean was kind of asking why they were doing all of this. The DA, along with the sheriff of Jasper, needing more evidence to convict Sean and Lawrence, would turn to Sean and lay the huge amounts of evidence that they had against him and basically ask him for a statement of what happened that night. Sean would somewhat break. Like, he would give an account, but then he gave 7 other different versions. So... there is not one set account of what happened that night, but one thing that did stay consistent in all 7 versions that Sean would give was that Sean had nothing to do with this. He was a mere witness, and it was John and Lawrence that committed this crime, and it would be John and Lawrence that killed him if they found out that Sean was speaking to the police about this.
Oh.
This was really all that they needed. I guess, like, the testimony of Sean saying, like, hey, these 2 were here, even though
just
it
even
was
mentioning their names. Yeah,
he mentioned it 7 different times. He just it was just different each time, but they were like, those 7 times, you know, the 2 consistent things, Sean had nothing to do with it, and John and Lawrence were there. So the cops took the John and Lawrence part and they fucking ran with it. And just 3 days after the brutal killing of James Byrd Jr., Sean Berry, John King, and Lawrence Brewer would be arraigned and charged with murder. And when this happens, the town of Jasper descends into fucking madness. You have a lot of media outlets that start to pour into the town, like CNN, ABC, CBS, Fox. They would start to come in, and people would basically start to point the finger at other people or try to point the finger away from the community of Jasper being racist in any sort of way. You would have Black residents who never supported a death penalty a day in their life now vehemently requesting the death penalty on these white supremacists that had killed James. The prosecutors during the trial and beforehand would receive death threats. They would also feel huge amounts of pressure from the U.S. Attorney's Office to make this a federal and not a state case, as well as once the inmates in prison around Texas found out what was going on, this, like, essentially started a race war in a lot of prisons. Like, obviously, a lot of, like, Black gangs were mad, and a lot of white gangs were, like, wanting to celebrate. So it caused a lot of tension within our prison system as well. The trial for John William King would begin on February 16th of 1999, where all 3 of them are being charged with capital murder. 14 jurors would be escorted into the courtroom of Judge Joe Bob Golden. And of those 14 jurors, 5 were women and 7 were men, one of whom was a Black man. The first witness to take the stand was Sheriff Billy Rolls. Rolls would describe the emotions that he felt when looking at the KKK insignia that was left on the lighter at the scene, and admits that as soon as he saw this, he knew in his heart that someone had been murdered purely for the color of their skin, and that this was in fact a hate crime that had been committed. I appreciate how they did this. They didn't show the photos, like, blow them up for everyone to see.
Right, yeah.
They very respectfully handed each juror a black envelope and then told the jurors to go ahead and open it, and inside were the photos that they were wanting to show. The jurors would be advised not to show any emotion upon looking at these photos, but I can tell you right now in that courtroom that none of them were able to do that, and a lot of them expressed the horror on their face as they looked at the photos of what happened to James. The author, Joyce King, like I said, was actually there for the trial of John King. She was there reporting it. And as a reporter, as a Black woman herself, she said that she had felt the overwhelming need to see these photos for herself. And when they had actually gone on break, she went over to the DA's office and went in and said, she said, hey, I need to see these photos right now. And he would ask her, are you sure these are very graphic? And she looks at him and she goes, no, I'm not sure, but I just know that this is something that I need to see.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, fucking minutes before she had to go on air and give a report over what was happening, she was in the DA's office and he I believe it was a woman that was showing the photos, because at one point the woman was like, you just let me know when to turn the page and I'll turn it for you. And the woman had said that because I guess like Joyce wasn't allowed to touch the book, but the woman that was touching the book like refused to look at the pages. So she was looking away from the book, and when Joyce would say, okay, turn the page, she'd be looking away and she would turn the page for Joyce. Like it was too brutal for even her to look at. Joyce would describe the shock that she first felt when seeing the first photos of Byrd's missing body parts, as well as the remains of what were left of his body, and said that when she first looked at these photos, she wanted to do nothing more than run out of that room screaming. The true devastation from this case came when Dr. Tommy Brown took the stand, and he would take about an hour to describe everything that had been done to Byrd physically on his body from the beating and dragging. Dr. Brown would say that the pre- and post-mortem coloring on Byrd's body, as well as a photo that was shown to the jury of the back of his head, were consistent with him being alive and conscious just before his head was severed from his body when hitting the culvert. After the trial, it would take the jury only about 2.5 hours to deliberate before Joe Collins, the black juror who was elected the foreman of the group, would read out the verdict. John Williams King would be found guilty of capital murder for the death of James Byrd Jr. and would be sentenced to death himself by lethal injection. King was the first white man to be sentenced to death row in Texas for the murder of a black man in nearly 150 years. And ironically, he would be sent to the James Byrd Diagnostic Unit, where he would later await death row, and he would meet his fate on April 24th of 2019 when he was killed by lethal injection. So fairly recently.
Yeah, he spent a while on death row.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people do. It's very common, but still, it just blows my mind sometimes.
Yeah, because you see Lawrence didn't wait that long.
Yeah. Wow.
Lawrence's trial would get put off for quite some time. There was a anniversary that happened of a really tragic event. So sorry, I really am not remembering. I may cut this out, but his trial gets pushed back for quite a few reasons, but it would officially begin on Monday, September 13th of 1999, and Judge Monte Lawis's, so sorry dude, said your last name wrong, but it happened in his courtroom in Bryan, Texas. The jury contained 7 men and 5 women, 11 of whom were white and 1 was Hispanic. The prosecutors would talk about how Lawrence was considered basically the leader in the white supremacist group CKA that he was a part of while in jail. And they would actually interpret, I believe it was like an 8-page letter that Lawrence had written. And in parts of the letter, he would state things like, well, I did it. I'm no longer a virgin. It was a rush. For Lawrence's trial, they would display the chains that were used to drag James's body. When unraveling the chain, Byrd's sister would say on the stand that the chains were symbolic of what her ancestors had went through. And when taking the time to show the full length of what the chain was, a lot of the jurors couldn't stand to look the entire time. And there were even a few jurors who began crying at that point. Lawrence, when given the opportunity on the stand, would try to spin the story that, Sean Barry had been the one to actually spray paint James in the face. And that it was when James went to cover his eyes that Sean would bring out a knife and actually slit James's throat. But 1, no one really believed this story, and 2, Lawrence was very well known around town in the small amount of time that he had been there for owning and brandishing a knife quite often. So a lot of people assumed that this was very much him just trying to diminish his factor in it and just being a dick. But then prosecutors come up to him and they're like, well, there's some blood on your shoe from when you gave the last kick into James Byrd's head. And to that, Lawrence would say, you know, well, I have no believable explanation to give to you as to why that blood ended up on my boot, but it's on there, so can't deny it.
Believable?
Yeah, he said, I can't give a believable explanation. So I'm like,
I'm like, okay, try me. Like,
so the only reason is that it's believable and you kicked his fucking head, and that's how he got the blood on his shoe. Either way. Thankfully, no one bought this bullshit, and the jury would find Lawrence Russell Brewer guilty of capital murder, and he too would be sentenced to death by lethal injection. He would be sent to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where he would meet his fate on September 21st of 2011, when he would be killed by lethal injection.
Damn, yeah. Way earlier.
Yeah. Kind of like, I don't know why that happens. It's just whatever.
Yeah, it could do with a multitude of factors.
Multitude. On November 10th of 1999, the trial for the capital murder charges that were being brought up against Sean Allen Berry would begin. And like I'd mentioned, the defense attorney really tried to paint him in more of a, I guess, angelic light, saying that, you know, he was very much a victim, as I feel fucking stupid saying this, but like, he was just, you know, fear-mongled into doing this, and his fear is the reason why he cleaned the truck, and his fear is the reason why he called the uncle asking about questions, and his fear is just really what stopped him from doing what any other sane person would have done and stopped the crime that was happening in front of him. But
bunch of pussies, all of them.
This was kind of thrown to the side when some fairly shocking evidence came out. So in the area, after James's body was dragged and they had to get out of the car to grab the remains or to rechain him, there was a footprint on the passenger side of the truck. And the original story that Sean had given, and is what is believed to have occurred that night, was that after they had chained James to the truck, John was the one that got into the driver's side and drove, dragging James the 3 miles.
Right.
Now, if this were true, then the footprint should have either belonged to Lawrence or Sean. But when they looked at the footprint that was shown on the passenger side of the car, it did not belong to Lawrence or Sean. It belonged to John. So the theory is, and what prosecutors really believed happened that night, was not only did Sean watch what happened and do nothing, but after watching his 2 buddies tie James to the car, Sean was the one who got into the driver's side and drove those 3 miles.
Unless he was sitting bitch, but
deserve everything that was happening to you, John. Sean doesn't even fucking matter.
100%. Because even if he was just along for the ride, perhaps driving, no, you're guilty. You are guilty.
The evidence is piling. There was, Lawrence in no way admitted to driving the car. I mean, even if he did do it, I feel like I just don't believe that that's something that Lawrence would lie about. Do I believe that he would lie about slitting the throat? Yeah, but it's just I hope that I said this right, but the evidence that was amounting towards Sean not having a fucking non-biased role and actually probably helping and beating James up a little bit, and definitely helping and dragging the fucking car while he was chained to it. It's just ugh. But yeah, Sean just stays quiet and he doesn't do anything, and he just really plays this fucking fearful character, which I just I literally, oh my god, it's kind of the one time I'm mad that he didn't get the death penalty, because probably because of his like downplayed role in the murder of James. He was not given the death penalty, though he was found guilty of capital murder charge. So he would be sentenced to life in prison. He's currently spending it at Ramsey unit in Rasharin, probably I'm saying that right. Don't like this, but he is eligible for parole in June of 2038 when he is 64 years of age.
That's if he gets that old.
To help make this a little bit better, he spends it for the most part alone. He is isolated for 23 hours of the day in an 8 by 6 foot cell that is 2.4 by 1.8 meters. And he is only allowed outside for 1 hour each day for exercise. Now, he is isolated and will probably never be able to be integrated into the general prison population purely for his own protection, because he is a racist asshole and everyone aside from the white people in that jail probably want him fucking dead.
Wow.
Yeah. So he didn't get the death sentence, but he's spending a lot of it in isolation. And if I have read anything about isolation, I know it makes you one fucked up person. So kind of...
I'm like, I think I like it there.
I'm kind of, you know what? I'm kind of okay with that. I really...
Like,
and it is something...
Can't fuck up a fucked up person.
Exactly. And I definitely don't say this, but one of James's only son... I believe his name is Ross. I'm so sorry if it's the daughter, but he was really adamant on not giving anyone who was responsible for his father's death the death penalty. Like he really didn't want anyone to die because of it, even though obviously 2 of them end up getting executed. It was something that he was very vehement about. He was like, you know, because of my Christian beliefs, I really don't want anyone in my family.
It's a nice way to put it. Other people would put it like suffering alone 23 hours a day for the rest of your life is hell enough.
Yeah. But like,
either way you put it, it's fine.
I don't fucking know how these people managed to get married, but you know, Sean ends up getting married by proxy to the girlfriend that he had the baby with that he was ignoring that night, Christy Marcontel. So she was like down with it? Yeah. Like, ew. She really obviously I didn't write this down. Really, really recommend reading the book. The book goes into way more detail than I ever will, and she does an amazing job of doing this. But when they get the capital murder charge, it's one trial, and then they like go to another trial to decide, okay, are they going to go life sentence or death sentence?
Yeah, because you go to trial and then you go to a sentencing
trial, whatever.
Yeah.
And so like Christine and Sean's mom, or maybe it was the other moms, but like they would obviously during the trial they were saying like, oh, you need to not give him the death sentence because whatever. And it was like when Sean was sentenced, Christy, whatever. I really don't give a fuck if I'm saying your name right. You're just as big of a part of a problem probably because you married a fucking racist. But sorry, girl, it's kind of true. But she just she was like, oh my god, Sean, like, you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm so fucking sorry. But she, like, stood by him. She has a baby with him. Married him by proxy. I mean, she, hopefully she's happy. I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. 'Cause can't say anymore.
I don't even have that much to say about that one.
Yeah, that's me being real nice to you, girl, because, you know, I'm sure James Byrd would have loved to be happy as well. But your fucking husband didn't give him that chance, so don't know why you would marry him. Really teaching your kids some great life values. Anyhow, after the sentencing of all of this, and after James Byrd Jr.'s brutal and fucking senseless death, state officials would put $350,000 into the state in order for them to study the problem of racist gangs in prison systems, and in hopes to better educate the public on how they are organized within our prison system. In 2001, Then Governor Rick Perry would sign the James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Act into law. And this is basically a law that strengthens penalties for crimes motivated by the victim's race, religion, color, sex, disability, sexual preference, age, or national origin in the state of Texas. So if there is any light at the end of the tunnel, it is that James Byrd's name will be remembered in law that will help so many others in his spot. This is without saying, though, that this law got put into place after George Bush, our former fuck you governor of Texas, opposed this bill and even decided as governor of Texas that he was not going to attend James's funeral because he had quote unquote a previous commitment. But in a weird twist of karmic fate, when Bush was elected president, Rick Perry was put in Bush's place.
Yeah.
And Rick Perry said, fuck you, I'm going to sign this bill. So he signed the bill. Thank you, Rick Perry, for the one good
Rick
thing
Perry.
you did. In 2009, we would have then President Barack Obama sign the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, memorializing both James's and Matthew's name, with Matthew, as many of us probably know, was a gay man who was tortured and murdered in Wyoming just a few months after James's senseless murder. As for the town of Jasper, there was, and probably still is, a lot of tension that arose from this case. The whites and the town leadership of Jasper very much tried to place the blame on the media for making them seem like they were some racist town, other than probably admitting that the town of Jasper maybe did have something to play with the racist acts that happened within their town, just saying. Mm-hmm. But in order to save the reputation that Jasper was a unsafe town and not safe to live in, Jasper would admit to having some fault in the racism in the town that led to the death of James, which I hate that we had to like twist your arm about it, but I guess thanks for saying something, maybe.
Yeah.
East Texas, for those who do not know, have had a long history with lynchings and racial violence, even comparing that to much of the deep South stories that we hear. And the only way to fucking combat this and to make a change is to talk about it and to educate ourselves. The Black community of Jasper says that the past must not be forgotten, and there is a bench that was commemorated in James's life that was placed on the county courthouse in 2018 after being donated by the Byrd Foundation for Racial Healing. But according to James's sister, Luvon Byrd, the bench had been moved to a less prominent location, showing the country that we still have a really fucking long way to go before any change is going to be made.
Hell yeah.
As for James Byrd himself, he got something that he always wanted in his death, and that is for people to know his name. He was buried at the Jasper City Cemetery, where his death actually inspired Jasper Minstrel Alliance to tear down a wrought iron fence that had been built in 1836 to separate the blacks and the whites in that cemetery. So from 1836 until James's death in 1989, there was this wrought iron fence in this cemetery that separated the blacks from the whites. And it was until James's death that that fence was torn down.
That is a badass, like, death wish, or, you know, like an in memoriam type of thing. That is badass.
Yeah. On the morning of November 19th, 1999, during a special wreath-laying ceremony, James's niece would sing "I Believe I Can Fly" to the crowd, as the family and others would join, singing just as they believed James would have if he was there. James Byrd Sr. would thank everyone in attendance, and again thank them for helping spread the word about James's story. And after he did this, James's sister would read from one of the ribbons that hang from the wreath, which read "Justice for James," and finally, rest in peace.
Hmm.
And that is the story of James Byrd Jr. and the terrible lynching that happened in 1998. And like I had said, this is not something that's even fucking new to us. Sorry, let me find it.
Well, yeah, it's not new nearly. It's clearly not even old.
There is a TikTok that I watched from Sunshine Lively. I hope that I am saying that right, but she mentioned how, I said 22, it's technically, on December 12th of 2021, Peter Spencer went on a hunting trip with 9 friends, was the only black man to attend that hunting trip, and was the only one to not return alive.
Ugh.
He was shot 9 times.
What the fuck?
No one has had any arrests sent to his death. It's just seen as an accident. This is something that has happened in 2021, and I am mentioning a case from 98, and I really don't see any differences. So it's hard as an American. It's hard as a fucking human being, because fuck being an American. We're human beings at the end of the day, each and every one of us, no matter where we're from. So for you to attack someone based on the color of their skin, based on how they were born, and they literally have no control over it, it is one of the most upsetting and disappointing things to see. It should not be happening. It should not still be happening. And to say that we, as human beings, as Americans, don't have a problem and that this is something that we have gotten over, fuck you, because no, it's not. So I know that there is a petition right now to try and investigate Peter Spencer's death. I will link it down below. But, I mean, like, in order for us to properly change, we need to remember these names. We need to talk about these names. We need to say these names. Like, I'm sorry for the brutality of today's case, but there's just no way for me to lightly go over what happened to him. It's just, you need to hear the brutality of it. You need to hear everything, because there's no way that I would hope after hearing this you can look at someone and judge them by anything other than how they treat you. It's just
100%.
We need to do better. So,
oh, thank you, Kristen.
I apologize if this is long, but it had to be talked about. I didn't really want to separate it into multiple parts. I just
No, I think I agree. It definitely needs to be talked about, not just during Black History Month, but all the time.
Yeah.
And I hope I want to do a better job at doing a more inclusive job, and in my stories, and this stuff is, Black history, slavery, racism. It is America. It's not just Black history. It is American history.
We were founded off of it. To say that America was not born on the backs of slaves is an understatement.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous to say that, to judge someone on their skin color and say they have less rights or
less of a human
like they
being.
Actually literally built the country, so I think they deserve it all.
Yeah, I think they get credit. So
and how tall are you again? Like
I think James was actually taller than all three of you, so
and he's like 5'6". I'm like, I got 2 inches on you, bud.
The fucking, the shortest, most shorty papas, I want to say he was like 5'4". So it's like, yeah, these short little fucks going around being douches, and it's
like you said, small man syndrome or whatever.
Small man, yeah, it's very much like, yeah, I'm just
small.
I really wish that we could castrate that part of the population, but hopefully Christine is doing a better job of teaching her son to not be like his daddy, because goddamn, was that too far? I don't really care.
Probably, but to go even further, he's like,
she can see me
probably
if
our
she
age.
wants.
Like, where you at? Are you fucked up?
Yeah, like literally the kid was born in like 98-ish, like literally around our age. So.
He's like our little brother. I'm like, are you fucked up? Do you know, like, do you know?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, literally, the kid is around our age. So to say that this isn't happening, like in the nowadays, like it's nowadays.
So sorry.
No, we shouldn't. And it's like, you know, we have to fucking laugh, because if not, we would be fucking sobbing. Because I don't know how I don't know how you expect me to get out of this closet and act like everything is okay when I just read like the worst fucking case ever, and I'm gonna fucking cry myself to sleep. Like it's just, and like the case that I'm researching, it's probably gonna be about a month before I talk about it. But you know, I thought I knew a lot about racism, or I had an idea of how racism in America was like, and then after reading half of that book, I'm like, no, I actually didn't know. And so it's just, there is so much that we have yet to even understand as society, as just this like notion that we have to just like inherently judge people no matter what. Because I mean, it's just like to say racism exists just within Black communities, like it doesn't. It exists in all amounts of communities, and everyone experiences racism in some way. But it's just it's a conversation for another day.
Well, yeah, exactly. But just to add on top of that, but not go too far and deep, is that like we're taught what we're taught in school, and they go into slavery and racism,
but they don't go into it.
They
don't.
They scratch the surface.
They barely. It's
barely, and that's it. And learning about racism and slavery is like, I know in my own experience in school, just learning about slavery, you know, I was pissed off. I was pissed. And so just as I got older and learning how it's literally
way worse than we thought it actually was.
So much fucking worse.
It's just
I'm like, this shit needs to be talked about.
We need to. It's not like we're not trying to push a fucking agenda. It's just, if you want history to not repeat itself, you need to talk about history.
Both needs to like
both
exist.
The good and the bad. Yeah, like we need to not only talk about like what made America, but also the fucking bad that came along with making America, the fucking taking the land from all of the natives, using slaves to build the new land. Yeah, it's just like, it's so
made America with other people's hands.
It's just, it's never fucking ending. And it's like, yeah, if you have a racist family member in your life that like you have been looking for an excuse to not talk to anymore, like here it is. I'm officially saying, like, leave a hot burning steaming pile of dog doo-doo on their porch, and when they complain about having to clean it up, being like, I'm sorry, you could have not been racist.
Who did that?
Okay, anyhow.
Well,
done ranting. Okay. Don't know how much that's getting cut out.
Cheers. How about this? Cheers to the Texas gubernatorial election 2022. Early voting has started, but if you would like Greg Abbott to not be your governor, if you obviously live in Texas, head to your nearest voting location.
And be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts, where we definitely tweeted about the Greg Abbott stuff, as well as, I don't know if anyone cares, but if you live in certain towns, we definitely always retweet missing people, so... Yeah. And,
we'll try and be more active on that anyways, regardless, at RARW Podcast.
And if anyone wants to hear a certain topic, if there's something that you are really wanting us to be passionate about, go ahead and send us an email, and we will passion ourselves right away on it.
Pretty please, we will whore ourselves back to you. Red Rum and Red Wine Podcast at gmail.com.
And until next time, guys, fucking, I know it's rough out there. Be the light that you want to see out in this world. There are a lot of fucking racists and a lot of assholes. And instead of being upset and just hating it, fucking be what they hate. be what they don't want to see, which is a loving person who judges fucking no one. And if you see something, fucking say something. Fuck not saying anything anymore. Fuck that. Like, okay, guys.
Yes. Bye.
I'm gonna go cry now.